Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Sean Finan. I'm the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association. You're welcome to webinar number 35 in our webinar series. And this morning's topic is highlights from the National Bioenergy Conference, conversations and next steps. This morning we hope to give you an update on the key discussion and conversations at our conference in recent weeks, as we have many of our webinar attendees who weren't able to make it in person on the day. So we hope you find the webinar this morning useful. And if you have any comments or feedback or questions as we proceed, please feel free to post them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So Pádraig, if you can move to the next slide, please. So just a very brief introduction to the Irish Bioenergy Association. The organisation was established in 1999. We're the representative body for the bioenergy industry in the island of Ireland. We cover all the bioenergy sectors: biomass, biogas, biofuels. We work in the biochar area, wood fuels and energy crop sectors. Our main work centres around policy, lobbying and advocacy, knowledge transfer, and we have a broad and diverse membership. We also roll out a number of research and development projects and schemes, including the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme, the Small Biogas Demonstration Programme, the 3C project and the Midlands Bioenergy Development Programme. And further information is available on our website, www.erbia.org. So next slide, Pádraig. This is webinar number 35 and number 36. We're going to kick off again with our webinars on a fortnightly basis, moving from here on, now that the conference is over. So we have an interesting lineup of panelists and speakers for you over the next number of weeks, including on the topics of sustainable aviation fuel, animal byproducts, sustainability, and the use of bioenergy in industry. So we look forward to publishing details of the upcoming webinars on our social media channels over the coming weeks and indeed over the coming days for our next webinar. Next slide, Pádraig. So this is just to give you an outline of the webinars which have been completed to date. As you can see, it covers a wide, diverse range of topics, and feel free to look back at any of those webinars which are recorded and are published on our YouTube channel, and indeed there's links to those on our erbia.org website. So this morning's topic, moving on, Pádraig, to the next slide, please. This morning we feature the Erbia team plus our president, Paddy Phelan, who will also just give his feedback from the conference. So Pádraig will give a presentation of the main feedback from the speakers, and then I will and also Teresa will give us an overview of the conference, attendees and who contributed in terms of our exhibitors and sponsors. And then I'll bring in Noel and Stephen at various points over the course of the presentation to give their insights into the discussions on the day. We'll conclude then with a brief panel discussion. And as I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the tab at the bottom of the screen. And we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible. So next slide, Pádraig. So I will now hand you over to Teresa O'Brien. Teresa is our communications manager with the Irish Bioenergy Association. Teresa put in a huge effort to get the conference up and running and get it all planned. And I'd now hand over to Teresa, who will take you through the next two slides. Thanks, Teresa.
Morning, everyone. This was the 21st National Bioenergy Conference. Just to give you a bit of a background, it was the first National Bioenergy Conference in 2 years. We missed out on a live event in 2021 and went online, and although it was a success, it was not quite the same. From my experience, the National Bioenergy Conference was always seen as a place to catch up on the latest developments in the sector and to meet up with colleagues from across Ireland. It was always the one big opportunity for that. So when I approached this event and organised it, it was with a degree of uncertainty in terms of, would participants value that face-to-face contact? Would they see the value in exhibiting? Are they more comfortable now logging on into events? Or all these types of questions were crossing my mind. But I can safely say that all my fears were alleviated. We had a great attendance and met the figures from previous years and went beyond that. We had 171 attendees. We had 17 trade stands, which, you know, really exceeded our expectations. We were really delighted and we're very thankful to Born & Mona to be headline sponsors. We also had 4 co-sponsors: Ethanol Europe, Southeast Energy Agency, Gloss Energy, and Gas Networks Ireland. And they all contributed as well in the speaker roles and panel discussions. So we were delighted with that. Urbia would like to, you know, thank them for their support here. What was also rewarding was talking to delegates and seeing how happy they were to be back chatting and networking, particularly in the exhibition hall. It was really a flurry of activity and a great buzz. In terms of coverage, we did 2 radio interviews. We had a number of online print media articles in many of the national and regional papers. And finally, just to say to you, we will have a recording of all the sessions and we'll be releasing them shortly. Access to them can be found on the National Bioenergy Conference website and also our own website, www.irbea.org. I have to say that again, www.irbea.org. And now we'll be looking forward to next year. We'll be thinking about themes and we'll also be thinking about time. So anyone who wants to contribute to that would be more than willing to get some feedback. Thanks very much, Sean, and I'll pass back.
And just, Teresa, I think your next slide just outlines the exhibitors. So just if you want to just comment on the range of exhibitors we had on the day.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So these were the exhibitors. It was a real good cross-section of biomass installers. We had energy agencies. We had 2 trade exhibitors coming from the UK. It's just a really good cross-section, and also Sustainable Energy Ireland. And obviously I've also put in our exhibitors there, and most of the our sponsors, and they also exhibited. So I think it was up at about 22. So that was really, you know, when you add everybody in, it's about 22.
Okay, thanks very much, Teresa. So if we move on to the next slide, Pádraig, and I think this brings you into the presentation this morning. So I'd now hand over to Pádraig O'Higgins, our project executive in the Irish Bioenergy Association. Pádraig, you can maybe take us through some of the highlights. And just to let you know that as Pádraig gives his presentation, we'll maybe stop at intervals just to bring in 1 or 2 of our panelists and maybe just get some feedback on some of the specific slides. So Pádraig, over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. So I've taken kind of a snapshot from the conference of highlights of the various panels and speakers. And as Sean said, we'll bring some people in to kind of discuss and show some of what did take place. So look, it's a snapshot, and but it will give a flavour, and certainly I suppose it's a useful exercise in itself in terms of seeing what the important issues are. And I suppose critically, where do we go from here? There was a lot of energy. I think Paddy said that there was our president, Paddy, who would be speaking shortly here, said there was a great buzz in the room, and he kind of captured the mood, but did highlight that, you know, we do need I suppose we do need action then, and tangible supports to come from that. If Paddy is there, Sean, I might bring Paddy in at this point, just in terms of he very much did. Paddy, if you can hear me, you very much kind of captured the mood of the attendees on the day, but I suppose you gave a signpost as to where, or signposts maybe as to where we need to go from here, you know?
Yeah, thank you, Pádraig. I suppose the sense of it was, you know, after many years that, you know, we happened, as it happened on that day, to be back at the same venue. And we had Mary Donnelly as our keynote, who had come to us in 2011 and spoke at our conference in Lyrath. And I think my point that across the room that there was a great buzz, the group that have stuck this sector through what we would consider to be a relatively poorly supported period of time. And I suppose the advent of SSRH and the challenges it has had, and other areas around, you know, seeking an European, you know, refocus on the whole biogas and biomethane area, that really we needed to see some political will and action here to bring the supports in to help us to decarbonise the existing energy system and the role that bioenergy has to play. So I think there's a great buzz, there's a great excitement, and that was founded, I suppose, on the reprioritization, I suppose, of the medium of biomethane particularly, and the ambition set at the European level in recent months. And really, the job of work in Ireland now is to get the Irish policy system and the markets in place that can facilitate a rollout of this, circular economy, locally supplied energy source. So really, the point I was making was that Mary Donnelly and I both spoke about this from the stage 11 years ago. And really, particularly in the space of biogas, not very much, if anything, has changed. So now is a time for change and a time for action and a time for support. And I think that fundamentally captured the mood, because all of us that have been in the sector have seen the challenges, have seen the hardship, have seen the efforts being made. And there's a lot of consideration given to this space, but it's lacking that key core support that would stimulate the sector and allow it to get up and away and secure the future of decarbonised energy, into the next generation, certainly from the context of the Irish state.
And Paddy, if I could bring you in there, I know you're under pressure for time, so just maybe to ask you one question regarding your own intervention on the day around the Southeast implementation. We focused, and Pádraig will outline in these slides as we come to it, but just because you're under pressure for time, just bring you in. Can you just give us an outline of your own work in the Southeast Energy Agency? And I know you've done a very specific piece of work around the bioenergy resource in the particular area. While we're not necessarily going to get into the figures of that this morning, just give us a broad outline of your work and you see the potential you see in your region and how that could be replicated right across the country.
Yeah, so Sean, I think importantly, it's almost from a first principles approach, because there are certain policymakers and decision makers that are new to the whole world of bioenergy, but be it across departments or their representative agencies, that need to fundamentally understand from first principles what bioenergy is about. So in that context, we have completed a resource assessment, and we've stress tested that resource assessment. We used an external expert to assist us with that. So on one side of the balance, we have identified that there is a significant resource potential. Now, we also know from a technology assessment that there is existing technology there to assist to convert that potential locally sourced in rural regions bioenergy and convert that into an energy medium. So a medium that is usable by the consumer, be that industrial, be that commercial, SME, public sector, or right down to the individual homeowner and a residential tenant, if you want to call it that. So in it, for example, we've taken a helicopter view. We've demonstrated the potential in the Southeast region across the 4 counties. And really, we intend to use that now as a plank to drive forward. I think importantly, it's important to note at this point that, on the panel we had the planner, we had the leader company. They're all well-tuned and well-positioned to support this sector. For example, Kilkenny County Council have had a significant chapter directly within their county development plan for the last 2 iterations. So that's over 14 years of support for the sector. So it's not issues at a local level. It's not particularly planning, because planning, if it's done correctly, can be delivered. It's actually fundamentally at a governmental support and a subsidy or grant or feed-in tariff mechanism to bridge that gap, which has been there for the last 20 years. And we have seen it across European jurisdictions. So really, through our European projects, using the examples of Europe, we've identified the potential, and really now it's a case of putting pressure on decision makers to go and invest in this indigenous supply, and the revenue and the jobs and the benefit to the state are significant. And it's really just a case of bringing those to bear and having them transparent and available for decision makers to see.
Okay, thanks very much, Paddy, and thanks for joining us this morning. I know you're a busy man and under pressure for time, so we do appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. So if I could hand back to Pádraig now, who'll take you through the rest of the slides.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Paddy. And I suppose maybe using Paddy's piece there as a segue in terms of to the high-level policy support and the changes needed. We had on Taoiseach and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar TD, as a guest speaker who gave an online address. And I suppose in terms of getting to, I suppose, the ear of government at a high level, and also in terms of the endorsement that An Taoiseach gave to bioenergy and to support schemes such as the SSRH. That was, I suppose, a valuable high-level interaction on the day. We are, Sean, going to show the, I suppose, the full online address from An Taoiseach to Leo Varadkar. So I will stop
5 minutes, Pádraig, is that correct? 5 minutes, I think, isn't it?
It's about 5 minutes, yeah. So it was a short, it was a fairly short and punchy address. So we'll run that. Stephen has it. So I'll stop sharing here, everyone, and my colleague Stephen will run that video. So just bear with us as
thanks, Pádraig.
As I say, I stop sharing and the editorial over here to Stephen. So this is on Taoiseach and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar TD, who gave the opening address to our conference.
Good morning to you all. I'm grateful to everyone in the Irish Bioenergy Association for the invitation to join you to open your first national conference since the onset of COVID-19. Thank you to Sean and Teresa for enabling me to address you remotely. I will be there in person, but I have to be present for a cabinet meeting this morning in Dublin, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. Today, the challenges of rising prices, security of energy supply, and the imperative to reduce emissions requires us to expedite our efforts to move to renewable energy. Ireland needs every renewable energy technology available, and bioenergy has a strong role to play in this. I understand that businesses have endured some very difficult years with Brexit, the restrictions related to the pandemic, and now, of course, inflation, particularly when it comes to energy costs. But I think it's fair to say that the government has not been found wanting when it's come to helping businesses get through difficult periods, whether it was the wage subsidy scheme to help businesses keep their staff on, the COVID restriction support scheme which helped with overheads, and the new small company administrative rescue process that allows businesses to restructure and survive. While many businesses are struggling, I think it's fair to point that very many are doing well, and that's evidenced by the fact that there are now 2.55 million people at work in Ireland, more than ever before, and 2/3 of those working for SMEs. While weaning ourselves off coal, oil and gas is a global challenge, it also presents an incredible opportunity for Ireland to reposition ourselves from importing most of our energy to becoming an energy exporter within a generation. I was interested to learn from Sean that worldwide bioenergy represents 62% of all renewable energy, showing the potential in Ireland to do much of the heavy lifting in meeting our renewable energy and climate action targets. Nonetheless, I understand that bioenergy, covering a broad spectrum of technology types, input materials and products, can possibly be a challenge to communicate to government. Bioenergy cuts across a number of areas of policy responsibility. As Taoiseach, I launched Ireland's first national statement on the bioeconomy in 2018. In it we said that the bioeconomy and bioenergy require policy coherence across a range of government departments, state agencies and public bodies. So the government values the role that you play in administering the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme on behalf of the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. It's important as we go into the winter that wood fuel suppliers and consumers know that the WFQA mark indicates wood fuel that meets high air quality, sustainability and fuel quality standards. It's also an indicator of indigenously produced fuels that support local businesses and their workers and contractors. Expediting the deployment of existing renewable energy technologies demands our attention in this context, and also in the context of climate change. I believe in a few decades that we can go from being an energy importer to being an energy exporter with all the benefits that come with it. Greater energy security, price stability, more employment and regional development. Every renewable energy technology, including bioenergy, has a role to play in this transformation. One of the areas where we're already helping, and where we can help more, is helping businesses to reduce the amount of energy that they use and to make energy savings. There are actually 20 different schemes that businesses can apply for to get help from the government to carry out an energy audit or to get grants for the installation of equipment such as solar panels, insulation and microgeneration. Of particular importance for the bioenergy sector is the support scheme for renewable heat, administered by SEAI, which was launched by my colleague, the then Minister Richard Bruton. Schemes and incentives like that are really important because it might be the case that we're not just experiencing an energy price shock, it could be an energy price shift. While energy prices might fall back, they might also remain at a higher level permanently, a shock followed by a shift. The best response to this is a long-term one, reducing the amount of energy we use and increasing the amount of renewable energy that we produce. I want businesses to become more aware of those schemes, such as the SSRH, for example, and I also want to improve them. We must be the generation that turns the tide on climate change and biodiversity loss. And we must be the generation that begins to pivot Ireland from fossil fuel dependency to being a renewable energy leader. We need to take better care of our planet, and this generation should aim to pass it on to the next in a better condition than we inherited it. Bioenergy, I believe, is a big part to play in this. The circular economy, environmental protection of air, soil and water, biodiversity, de-risking energy supply for businesses, and creating sustainable local enterprise and jobs. The focus of the government is on reducing costs, carbon and securing energy supply for businesses and families. We're backing business and we want to put more money in your pocket. So I wish today's speakers well, and I hope you'll have a very valuable exchange of information, insights and ideas. And I'm sure it'll also be a good networking opportunity too. I'm always open to receiving your views and contributions to policy development and debate in Ireland. Gynari Galib Leishan Law, Gurv Mila Magav, Slán go fóill.
So that was Tánaiste Leo Varadkar, TD Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, who gave our opening address, or gave the opening address at our conference. So, Sean, I'll go back then to the highlights. Okay, so just confirming, Sean, you can see everything that I'm sharing there again, yes?
Yes, we can indeed.
Perfect, yeah, just for the benefit of the viewers online. Yeah. So I suppose in terms of, there were a number of highlights from the Tánaiste's own address. There were a couple of critical high-level ones that, you know, Paddy mentioned that over the last 11 years, when he was referring back to Paddy, our president, Paddy Phelan, he was referring back to when he'd previously been in the same convention centre for 11 years ago, and the conversation with Mary Donnelly, who features in this presentation as well, that particularly in terms of biogas, there's been possibly a lack of critical action in that time frame. But there were a couple of things that the Tánaiste highlighted in his address, that policy coherence is necessary. That was valuable to hear, that the acknowledgement from that level of government that policy coherence is important. Policy coherence across government departments and state agencies is very important to the bioenergy sector. And Paddy touched on something too about communicating to where there are new decision makers or new officials in very key departments and state agencies, that, you know, we need to communicate the message about bioenergy from first principles, so that it's very much understood. And then there's another critical high level point that Tánaiste made there as well, which is that we need every renewable energy, and that bioenergy has a big part to play in that. In terms of, I suppose, the supports on the ground, this slide is kind of capturing that quote from the Tánaiste, which is that schemes such as the SSRH, he has looked across government in terms of the various schemes supporting businesses, including the SSRH, and that he's looking to constantly improve them. So that's good to hear. And the SCAI as well, their representative on a later panel, also mentioned about how they've looked at the SSRH they administer and deliver the scheme, and how they've looked at the scheme and how they're speeding up the process, which is all good to hear. So I'll move then to through the highlights. As Therese outlined in her presentation, we were grateful to have Bord na Móna as our headline sponsor, and their head of renewable energy, Dr. John Riley. He gave addressed in and highlighted how I suppose the Eden Dairy facility in particular, that they're making a large investment there, and they're looking to move to 100% biomass very shortly, and we'll probably touch on that later on in the discussions here. Our first panel then, we had, as you can see there, we had Mary Donnelly, who we've mentioned already, and she's the chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council. There were a number of different points that kind of Mary touched on, and again, she brings that kind of high level perspective that she's looking across climate action generally in the country, climate action, renewable energy, and then in terms of advising government. So it was interesting again in terms of kind of capturing the mood in the room, or the mood in the sector. That Mary saw that, you know, we were at the start of what she would see as an opportunity. But again, bringing that down then from kind of the helicopter overview to the real situation on the ground in the market or in the business. There was a very interesting comment from Mary, which was that we need to think about biogas for district heating. And in fact, if you look across other European Union member states, biomass has very much been the backbone of district heating in those countries for a number of years. But we need to make sure that it's in the discussions about the rollout of district heating here in Ireland. Paul Dean then, always someone to give you very much can translate the complex, the kind of research paper stuff that he probably reads maybe, I won't guess how many a day, but that can convert the very fine kind of energy research into practical day-to-day terms in a meaningful way. He mentioned about he was discussing biofuels and decarbonising transport, and highlighted that, you know, outside of the room, very few people would realise that when you fill your car, you're putting in biofuels, whether you're filling, if you're driving a petrol engine car or diesel engine car, that there are through the biofuel blending obligation, that there are biofuels, that there is biofuels content within those, and that it has a large, in terms of our targets for decarbonising transport, that biofuels has a large role to play along with the electric vehicles. Still on the biofuels point, one of our members, so again, giving I suppose the insight from the business operating on the ground, one of our members, Julianne O'Reilly, beg your pardon, from College Biofuels, she highlighted that 87% of the decarbonisation of transport in Ireland comes from biodiesel, that the biodiesel component takes up a big share, or contributes a big share of that. Again, staying kind of on the ground at the direct face with the direct interaction with the consumer in terms of the bioenergy industry in the market. Ger Cross from Mudco gave a very interesting presentation that will be very much of interest to should be very much of interest to energy consumers, where basically they can take I suppose they can take the headaches out of moving over to decarbonising your heating requirements for larger scale energy users. So he can basically operate and run, install and operate and run your energy system for him. So effectively for you. So effectively, they will you can outsource your wood chip or wood pellet boiler facility. You can outsource that to Ger, and he will run that for you. So the mechanism for that then is an ESCO for short, which is an energy supply contract. So that was an interesting insight from Ger, and again should be very much of interest to some of the examples he gave included care homes, nursing homes, and I suppose tourism facilities as well. That it's a good opportunity, and then that brings us here to what was, I suppose in simplest terms, was a very interesting panel discussion, because you had a good cross section. I suppose I've said in a previous webinar that the B in bioenergy could stand for broad, because it's a very broad sector, and the same issues crop up from time to time. And one of those is that the policy coherence one that Antónis spoke about in his opening address. And we had representatives there from a number of key departments and state agencies. So the Department of Transport, the Department of Energy, Environment, Climate Action, or Climate Change, and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and then the SCAI. So very much important to kind of see that the officials were around the one discussion table, and the officials, while they're not spokespersons, in general for their organizations, they play a critical role in terms of engaging directly with the industry and with the citizen or the consumer, and then in terms of advising, working together and advising government ministers and the decision makers further up. So it was an very interesting panel to get that collection of people together on the one panel. But it's also a useful opportunity for members to hear where they are in their schemes, etc. Sean, I think you want to bring Noel in here. So Noel,
thanks very much, Pádraig.
Noel was on that panel,
Yeah, so if I could just bring in Noel just very briefly on this panel, and just to highlight on the day that Barry Quinlan was, or Tony Collins, who was the head of Heat and Business Energy Efficiency in the Department of Environment, Climate Action and Communications, just replaced Barry Quinlan on the day. So if I could bring Noel in, maybe Noel, just very briefly, while we had a cross sector here from the point of view of various different government departments and also SEI represented by Lewis, can you give us just an outline of what you heard on the day? And specifically, a lot of our members and some of our attendees this morning who wouldn't have been at the conference would be interested in the renewable heat obligation, and what role that's going to play in terms of the development of the sector, the heating sector, and the use of bioenergy and renewables in the heating sector. So can you just give us an outline from your own perspective in terms of the main discussions in this panel on the day?
Yeah, just briefly, I suppose, through the different speakers. Valerie Hughes, obviously from the Department of Transport. Really, the discussion there was following on from earlier discussions around the blends we have on our biofuels. So currently, the blends that we have and what the potential is in the future. It has delivered the greatest reduction in carbon emissions from our transport fleet. Most of practically all has come from the use of biofuel over the last 10 years, and it is something that has quietly been delivered some level of success. So the potential to expand that shouldn't be ignored, and it's something that it is something that they are aware of. So that all comes down to, and again, some of our speakers there from during the day were showing the different various biofuels, which have tended not to be seen in strong light in media. To quote something that was earlier said by the Taoiseach, or by the Tánaiste, that was that it's technically this stuff is recognised, but in policy it tends not to be, and it's something that we need to address more. What are the practical solutions that are there? So transport and the biofuels will be a critical part in that. In terms of the various policies and the renewable heat obligation, look, critically, the renewable heat obligation is seen as may well be a very good step forward, and it's very much related to the biofuel obligation scheme, which has given us that success in biofuels. The RHO does have good potential to do the same, and it's basically the same thing. You're going to mandate importers or suppliers of fossil fuels to have a percentage of a renewable fuel in there, or be able to offset a percentage of it. And that has created great adaptation in our petrol and diesel. but it can also do the same for heating. Now, the question though is the details of the renewable heat obligation, because although we have heard of it, there's been consultations of it, so far the only thing that's really been confirmed is the name of it. We don't really have the details. And until we know what those details are, it's very hard to tell whether it could be a success or a failure. It could very easily be a failure if it ignores a lot of fuels, if it's just going to be applied on the large importers, which was the original consultation. And that would effectively mean, because of the scale a supplier would need to be at, it effectively was eliminating most of the kerosene market from being obliged. And so therefore we do need to make sure that it's not going to do that. And secondly, the question is what fuels can garner renewable obligation certificates so that can provide the renewable portion, because definitely we want biomethane to be in there, and that's a given that it will be. But also we've vast quantities of wood fuels and biomass fuels, solid fuels that could contribute very strongly in that, and it could be a very good long-term way of ensuring that those measures are brought in place, and the heavy lifting that can be done by those fuels is properly recognised and properly supported. So
okay, no, just on the actual, when the scheme, what are the steps in terms of introduction? What did the department outline on the day? While we might have follow-on webinars about the actual detail, if you just very briefly outline what are the steps from here in terms of the RHO?
The steps are, they've put out a consultation. We've all responded to that. They are now going through that consultation and will hope to put forward a draft proposal for the scheme, and which we'll be able to comment on. That is, we're now told will be somewhere toward probably early next year, with introduction of a renewable heat obligation by 2024. So okay. It is going to take a little bit of time to put in place, but if it's well put together and if it mirrors the biofuel obligation scheme, it could deliver very good progress. But if it's not shaped correctly, it will not work. So okay. The level is really in the detail on this one.
Okay, so it's very clear the government have made a decision to introduce a renewable heat obligation, and the next step is a consultation, and the following step then is the design and implementation of the scheme. So thanks, Noel. We'll bring you back in again later. I'll just hand back to Pádraig now, who'll take you through the remaining slides, and then we'll have a short panel discussion at the end. Over to you,
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Noel. And yes, I'll go back to the highlights. I suppose one thing to flag is that unfortunately on the day, Danone's net zero carbon director Paul Kennedy was called away at short notice, but Sean and he are planning a webinar in the near future. So watch this space. And then Paddy, this was a very useful panel because it looked at bioenergy on a regional basis, and I suppose the project I'm working on myself, the Midlands Bioenergy Development Project, is also taking bioenergy at a regional level. And one of the kind of points flagged here was that there are times where, while depending on the type of feedstock, that while supply might not work on a single county basis, it could work very well in terms of supply and demand, where a number of counties come together, as in the example of the Southeast Energy Agency, which is now expanded to 4 from 3 counties in the southeast. So the entire southeast corner. Paddy Phelan, our president, has covered this panel already in his introduction, or in his presentation. But there was one critical point that I kind of heard in this, and it's very relevant in terms of especially where the farming community are being discussed, and where they were front and center in terms of the sectoral emissions discussions during the summer, particularly around anaerobic digestion. And it was anaerobic digestion featured in all the primetime media discussions about it. But a very interesting observation from Paul O'Brien, who's farming in the southeast, and he's an IFA national chairman, national committee chairman for environmental and rural affairs, and that was that, you know, he doesn't want to see a situation, a scenario where farmers are inputting into the bioenergy sector, particularly the biogas and biomethane, as almost kind of the lowest common denominator for low value, that there's a very important role for farmers to play, and that they can add value to the sector while decarbonising at the same time. So that was a very the critical insight, because the farming community are going to be very critical to key to supply in terms of the broader feedstock supply for anaerobic digestion. Staying on I suppose the farming and the food production side, but maybe looking a bit more at the wood fuel side, there was a very interesting presentation from Arrivo's Stephen Blewett, and one of the kind of standout things here was that they were in terms of supporting local enterprise, in terms of decarbonising their own business by approximately 50% in terms of CO2, but also supporting local enterprise in terms of sourcing their biomass for their boiler, sourcing that within 15 kilometres, and working with another or be a member in that. So that's, another positive story, not biomethane in this case, but the wood fuel and the wood boiler significantly decarbonising I suppose their fuel supply. And this is a journey that they've been on for I suppose the last 10 years now. Then again, I suppose switching to a different in terms of another presentation, and again a member, and to note at this point to thank Ethanol Europe as an associate sponsor, James Cogan, who is a policy analyst for Ethanol Europe and the Clon Bio Group, broader Clon Bio Group, also the chair of our transport group within Irbea. There was, again, going back to what the Taoiseach said in his opening address about the need for policy coherence, to put James's piece into maybe one line, was that he saw that there are mixed messages. There are often kind of mixed messages coming from, he was speaking about biofuels and biogas for transport, that there are often mixed messages coming from government. So I think James, from the industry perspective and representing that, kind of touched on that there needs to be coherence, and that one policy message from government tallies with another. So that's again something to kind of bring forward, and for us all to continue to kind of press for beyond the conference. Then in terms of one of the I suppose the people at a high level in terms of advising government, there was a series of questions with the EPA Ireland's Director General Laura Burke, and particularly in terms of bioenergy, but particularly in terms of anaerobic digestion. And I think one of the things that Laura Burke highlighted was that certainly the EPA research side of their house has very much supported research and innovation in the broader AD, anaerobic digestion sector, possibly even going back at least 15 years, if not 20. That there's a good body of research already done there in terms of even looking at technical issues that might be particular to Ireland, but very much was reflecting that AD or biogas is very much appreciated at the technical level, but that not at the policy level. And I suppose some interesting insights in terms of that, we need to continue to work on and press on the communications, economic and sustainability pieces to present the merits of bioenergy generally, but particularly AD, to government. Paddy touched on something as well, that there can be a changeover of officials in certain areas. So it is key to kind of keep that going. Noel mentioned, and Sean there in the discussion just prior to this, about the RHO, the Renewable Heat Obligation. And again, to acknowledge and thank another associate sponsor, Gas Networks Ireland, their biomethane program manager, its biomethane program manager, Pádraig Fleming. A number of interesting insights, but particularly in terms of the Renewable Heat Obligation, highlighted something that if you look back at other schemes that have been introduced in Ireland and other areas of I suppose, renewable energy, that it needs to support indigenous production. Otherwise, we'll end up in what I would describe as a paper exercise where we're buying in certs from another EU member or another country, but most likely another EU member state. So an interesting insight there, something flagged, kind of a flag raised by Pádraig Fleming there. Again, something that another associate sponsor, and again, grateful to Glass Energy and Colin Byrne. Number of interesting points raised by Colin. We may even bring in Stephen here, Sean, if that suits on time. A couple of highlights. Again, someone who's working, an industry member who's working in the sector, did reflect that the SSRH, this is support scheme for renewable heat, is making a difference in the sector. But there are a number of things there that were useful from Colin. I don't know if you want to bring in Stephen at that point.
Stephen,
Sean,
if you could join us, Stephen. I know you were on the technology on the day, but you were particularly interested with Colin's inputs on the day. So if you could maybe, Stephen, give us your thoughts on those, please.
Certainly. I guess he was pointing out, and he very strongly made the point that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look to policy interventions in other countries. And he kind of pointed out what's been happening this year, in particular in Germany, where I think he said it gave a figure of maybe 42,000 pellet and wood chip boilers have been granted by local government in the first 6 months of 2022. Now, he said there's no drastic changes need to be made. We can just literally lift the legislation and transpose it over here to Ireland and try and mobilize a scheme where homeowners can have some of the cost of swapping out their oil systems for high efficiency pellet systems can be done. I had a look online. Some of the grant aid figures for different jurisdictions in Germany are between 35 and 45% of the cost of a new high efficiency solid biomass boiler system. The particulate matter is a discussion that kind of gets brought up occasionally with regards wood fuel and wood pellets. He very strongly defended it, saying it's not an issue. It's dealt with. If Germany can do it, why can't we? But all the grant-aided boilers all had secondary particulate matter filters as standard, and so it wasn't a concern whatsoever. And then when you try and couple the replacement of oil boilers with high efficiency and clean solid biomass stoves, and then couple them with indigenously produced wood pellets like Balcas provided, for example, then the argument really is, we should be getting behind a scheme like this and trying to mobilize a scheme like this here in Ireland. So I thought it was very.
You're a wood pellet user yourself as well, Stephen. So
I am indeed. No, I find them great, and I think we should do more of them here in Ireland, across the continent. They really have gone for it in a big way, and especially if you can produce them locally and source them locally, like it makes sense.
And you're using a WFQA supplier, Balcas pellet, I think you're saying.
Of course, they're located close to me, and look at they're great products. So I'm delighted with them. Yeah.
Okay, Pádraig, we hand back to you. We'll bring it back in a minute or two, Stephen, just for the final roundup regarding the panel session. So Pádraig, I think you're not too far from the end, anyways. But just
thanks, Sean. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, thank you. So just again, very quickly here, a couple of interesting insights in terms of Carbery Group in South Munster in particular. Interesting point made by their Director of Sustainability in the Buckley. And again, this goes back to in terms of involving farmers in a very meaningful way where they're encouraged to add value. That they've launched a sustainability bonus for farmers. So again, that makes that attractive for the farming community to contribute more to the sector. I suppose one of the things, and I'm taking a comment here from one of the our headline sponsor, Board Namona, and again to acknowledge and thank Board Namona for their sponsorship and all the associate sponsors. But their biomass manager, Joseph Spallin in particular, the interesting observation from him, and this again goes to the high level caliber of the speakers on the day, right through from, I suppose, industry and the officials working within government departments and state agencies, but all the way up to the decision makers around the government table and cabinet table. And that was that in his time coming to these types of conferences, that this is the first time that he's had we've had a high profile address from someone like An Taoiseach, Minister for Enterprise and Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar, and that was important in terms, I suppose, endorsing the valuable role of the sector, but also in terms of IRBA and its members, and as a membership organisation engaging with government at a high level. So again, I suppose engaging with government here, this the closing address then was from Sean Kelly, MEP, who doesn't need an introduction, but I suppose important to note that he was a special rapporteur for the development of the RED II directive in the European Parliament, the Renewable Energy Directive Mark II, and he highlighted one of the things. There were a number of points that Sean Kelly made in his address in closing the conference, and in terms of giving the European perspective. But there were a number of points he made, but just one that he kind of emphasised was that, you know, if we look at Ireland, that we have the highest biogas potential of any member state in the EU. And then he also flagged that the government needs to take meaningful steps in terms of policies and supports and incentives to roll that out. And I suppose he's coming from a perspective where he's worked on the renewable energy directives generally, and any renewable energy technology in any member state has gotten both capital and current support. So a number of points, but I think he did emphasise himself. Sean Kelly MEP did emphasise the one about our biogas potential. So this was the last panel. Then I've kind of referenced most of what was kind of covered in that, but also just on this panel was Declan Mealy of the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, who administered the SSRH, and just acknowledged again that he did make the point, to recap on the point that he did make. He did say that the process for the SSRH is being speeded up, but I've kind of covered, I think, most of the speakers here. So just in terms of the highlights I was giving, just to thank everyone who attended, thank the sponsors. I'll hand over to Sean because I'm kind of conscious of time, but I'll leave the slide up for the moment, Sean, if that's okay. Or...
Okay, no problem. Thanks very much, Pádraig. And just to very briefly say as well, there are a couple of speakers on the day that we haven't featured in these slides, and just we apologize. It's just we were limited on time, so we took a snapshot of the day, but all of the recordings will be available. So just very briefly run through the speakers we didn't feature. So Luke Pelkman, Technical Coordinator of the International Energy Agency, Bioenergy, also spoke about the role of sustainable bioenergy in the global energy transition. So we have an online video address from him, and it will be on our conference website. Rowena Dwyer from the Managing Manager of Sustainable and Climate at Enterprise Ireland, and also Tom Egan, Operations Director at Board Namona. We also had very good contribution. We've gone through the contributions of some of the department officials. You saw their names on the screen. So Valerie Hughes, Noel mentioned, Tony Collins, but also Michelle Carney, Lewis from SEI, and so just acknowledge those contributions. And then finally, you mentioned at the end on the last panel about Declan, we didn't feature a quote from Declan. And also, we were delighted to be joined, and a late call up on the day, and thanks very much to Darren Carty from Sustainable Flight Solutions for agreeing to participate on the day and outline his own work through his own company and organisation in terms of developing a feasibility study around the use of sustainable, or the development of a sustainable aviation fuel sector in Ireland. And we'd like to wish Darren and indeed his colleague in Sustainable Flight Solutions, Agnes, the best luck in their feasibility study, and we look forward to featuring both on a webinar in the near future, where we can get their insights into where the potential for this sector is in Ireland and the potential contribution that bioenergy can make. So that covers all of our speakers, and we had over 30 speakers on the day, so it was a long day with lots of contributions. So if I could now ask just Stephen, Noel and Teresa just to rejoin us on screen for the last couple of minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to post them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. If I could just maybe turn to back to Noel just very briefly, and again, if you could just quickly comment on each of the points that I'll ask you to comment on. It would be very good. Noel mentioned about the transition at Bord na Móna Edenderry Power Limited to 100% biomass. Could you comment on that, Noel, please?
Yeah, I mean, Bord na Móna have been using biomass on that plant for over 10 years at this stage, and it has set a floor for biomass supply. And on foot of that, we have a number of suppliers that have built up, businesses where we have the capacity now to supply biomass in much larger scale. So it has not only has it obviously helped to decarbonize some of our electricity, but it has also put a foothold into the market for biomass in general and large scale biomass. Okay. So we see it's a lot easier for other companies then to consider large scale biomass plants when the supply chain has now been opened up and is a working industry.
Planning permission has been secured up to 2030 for 100% biomass at Edenderry, and there's big plans which are outlined by John in his presentation about development and investment at the Edenderry campus. So Noel, just one second question, if I could ask you to comment on ESCOs. J.R. Cross made a big point on them. We've obviously many members involved in biomass system install, but ESCOs are a form of heat contract. Maybe can you just very briefly outline what's involved in those?
It's energy supply contract is what it stands for. I mean, basically, it's where a user of heat, be it a hotel or a commercial premises, factory, whatever, they hand over responsibility for installing the boiler, for running the boiler to a company that comes in, an ESCO company. So the ESCO company will come in, put in the boiler system, fuel it, manage it, run it, do everything that's needed to do to make sure it's producing the heat that's needed. And all that happens then, you've got a heat meter between the boiler and the user, and they pay for their heat based on heat use, based on the heat that they purchase. And it takes, so the hotel can concentrate on being a hotel and leave the experts then to deal with the boiler.
Stephen, if I could bring you in, you're involved in the Interreg 3C project. Can you just outline maybe how your own work in that project kind of ties in with the discussions on the day from the point of view of our main themes and topics and panel discussions?
Certainly. Well, I suppose 3C, well, IRBI have been involved in a number of Interreg projects over the last number of years, looking at the area of biochar production and use. And we hope to continue to be involved in this sector. Now, it's worth noting, two exhibitors on the day are involved in the biochar space. We had an EIP project, Biomass to Biochar. We also had Salignus, who offer biochar testing services. Now, IRBI's membership, we continue to see interest in the developing biochar sector. But to give you a very brief outline, I suppose it's about the thermal conversion of biomass for provision of heat, which can be put to good use, so it can be integrated into heat networks. Provision of a useful biochar substrate, which is an effective way of sequestering carbon as it happens. It can also be used in the horticultural and agricultural sectors, to name a few. And then more recent developments we've seen happening across Europe is that they're now actually integrating electricity production through pyrolysis units. So it's a really interesting sector. It can be used to provide heat, electricity, and usable products in the form of biochar.
Okay, I think a point that you that resonated particularly with you was the short supply chains of Arivo. You're based in the Arivo catchment yourself, no more than my own home places in the catchment as well. So. See, would you like to comment on that and the local supply chains?
Yeah, no, it's a very impressive facility, and Stephen Blewett gave us a presentation and a video on the day. I think he alluded to the fact that it was basically supplied by forestry thinnings from within a 15 to 20 kilometer radius. So if you think about the impacts on that, I think he said that they were offsetting maybe 100 or 16,000 tons of CO2. If the direct replacement for kerosene and LPG. Now, it doesn't 100% power their business, but it's a large proportion of it. And if you think about that supply chain, it's providing rural employment opportunities. It's keeping the money in the local economy. I think it's great, and they've been operational since maybe 2014. I think, the best of my knowledge, is one of the larger biomass boilers in the region, anyways. So very impressive.
Okay, Pádraig, we just conclude maybe. Well, we'll take a question for yourself, and then we'll conclude with one question for Teresa. So in terms of your own work, Pádraig, on the Just Transition funded Midlands Bioenergy Development project, can you just outline, again, similar to what Stephen did, the link between the conference and your project and what you're trying to achieve through your project?
Thanks, Sean. In a nutshell, biomass supply and building up supply chains in the wider Midlands region, which is basically covering, I think, any county outside of Ulster that doesn't, apart from Galway, that doesn't touch the sea, is in that region. Yes, in a nutshell, the project is looking to kind of support new startups, identify and support new startups, and build up biomass supply in the region.
And I'm sure you'll be in touch with many of our attendees this morning who are key stakeholders in the sector, and
Sure.
indeed attendees at the conference over the coming weeks around that project and how to roll it out, the rollout of it. Okay, if I could bring Teresa in just as a last on maybe one or two practical points. So Teresa, the curtain is closed on 2022 conference. So next year planning is beginning already or starting in the next couple of weeks. So what's your call to maybe members or indeed those in the industry in terms of our next conference?
Well, I suppose, I would like to say, if you're interested in getting involved, please get in touch. Certainly we want to keep the momentum going. There's definitely a lot more talk in the bioenergy space now, and it just is reflected in the speakers that came to Kilkenny. And so we want to just repeat that really and get a high quality event going for next year. So if anyone has any contributions, any ideas, we're more than welcome to take that feedback.
And that's for the conference, Teresa, but it's also for other events, because we roll out other events, and also for our webinar series. So
so anyone who logs on to these webinars will be mailed on the upcoming events, and there are many coming forward now, smaller events, more focused areas, and in some cases site visits. So
there'll be a number of webinars fortnightly from here until Christmas, and indeed into the new year. Noel is also planning a series of solid biomass information events linked with the SSRH and the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme, which we will be publishing details in the coming week. And also Pádraig is planning some events around the Just Transition project. So it plans to be a busy couple of weeks pre-Christmas and indeed into the new year. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank Teresa for organising today's webinar in terms of getting the link set up, getting it all. Thanks to Pádraig for putting together the slides, and indeed for Stephen and Noel for your contributions and assistance, and also to Paddy Phelan for joining us this morning. I'd like to thank our attendees this morning for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you back again to our next webinar, and indeed engaging with you as we undertake our various work areas over the coming weeks and months and years. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll call it at that, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
bye.